Welcome to today's tutorial where we'll be making this low poly grassland scene with a pond, a stone border and some grass and some low tats spawned in this. Everything here is procedural except these low tats which I modeled, and everything is based on curves. I go into edit mode on these and I move these so you can see the pond is moving and the grass is moving as well with it. So the grass is spawned only outside the pond and the low tats are spawned inside the pond, and the stone border moves according to the area of the pond. So let's see the node network before we start. So this is the node network that we will be making. This looks a bit complex, but it's totally not. So this should not be very difficult to make, but if you find it difficult somewhere, you can go and watch the previous tutorials and build yourself familiar with geonodes and then come back to this and try this out. So let's get started with a new Blender file. So first of all, I'll hide this cube because we don't delete the default cube, and let's add a Bezier object. Press Shift A to add curve and Bezier to add a Bezier curve. Now press 7 to go into the top view mode and press tab to go into edit mode, and either you can press R to rotate and E to extrude and make a shape like we made in the previous tutorial, or what you can do is take this draw tool right here and make a rough shape like this, and it even closes it for you automatically. So I prefer this over this because this is more organic and quicker to make than this, although this has more control over everything. But you can just go in manually and select any point you want like this and rotate it later if you want. So let's select all of these and delete and add one more shape right here, and then we will start. Select the draw tool and add an organic shape like this, and even if you don't draw it completely smoothly, it automatically smooths it out for you. So while we have it selected, let's go into the geonodes tab and let's add a new geometry node network, and let's click this to pin it here also. So even if you select any other object, it does not disappear. Now for this particular render, I switched from cycles to Eevee because I use 2D shaders for it. Other than that, all the settings are pretty much default. We have ambient occlusion, bloom, and the color management is AGX and medium high contrast. These are not default, but what I use by default, and I've set to default. Let me just change my resolution to 1080 by 1080 so we can see things better here. And let's just also turn off these overlays. So what I like to do is select this window and click on this and move this to the geometry nodes editor also. And you can hide this panel by pressing N. Now the benefit of this is you can have two interfaces of geonodes right here, and you can keep one of these like this zoomed out where you can see the overview of everything, and this one you can work zoomed in so you have a better idea of what's going on. So let's start by adding a stone border around this curve. So we'll start by adding a curve to points node to turn the curve into points. Now we have a bunch of points around the curve. You can increase the count or you can change it from count to length. So you specify a length and then the points are distributed over this length. So the higher the length, the more distance is between the points, so there are less points, and the lower the length, the less distance between the points and then more points. So let's reduce it to something like 0.4 and keep it to length. Next, let's add an instance on points node and plug it right here. Now everything is gone, but it's still there. We just need to add something to instance on these points. So let's add an icosphere node and connect this mesh into the instance. Now the size of this is too big, so let's change the radius to something like 0.2 and it's better now. And change the subdivisions to 2 if you want to get a smoother shape. Now let's make some space. And these are flat shaded, but if you right click and shade smooth or shade auto smooth, it does not change because these are added right here in the geometry nodes tab. So what you can do is keep it to shade flat and then add a new node called set shade smooth and plug it right here and click this shade smooth. So this will shade them smooth. Next, let's randomize the rotation and scale on these. So I'll just minimize this and stack them like this and move them closer. just to manage the things better. Now first let's randomize the scale and then we'll randomize the rotation. So to randomize scale, we will definitely add a random value node, set to vector, and plug this value to the scale. Now let's adjust the scale. So I'll increase the minimum so it does not go 0 in any direction, because we don't want any large gaps in these stones. But if you prefer that, you can do that. And we also need to keep the Z pretty high so that these are not like flat on the ground like this. They don't look very good. So we'll increase the minimum to something like this. Let's say 0.3, and let's keep the Y to 0.6 or 0.7. I guess this looks good. And now let's randomize the rotation on the Z axis as well. You can also increase the Z height, max Z height, so we get a better overall variation. And you can always go through the seed to change the distribution if you don't like what you see. Now it still looks a bit not random because the minimum X and Y values are same. So I'll just change it to 0.2 and change the Y to 0.6. Also, let's change the maximum values to something like 1.4, 1.5, and the Z to 1.6 or 1.7. These are the values I've tried before, so I guess these work well. There are some stones which go pretty thin on this, but let's keep it to these values. Now let's minimize this random value and move it down below the scale. And let's add another random value node. Set it to vector and connect this value to rotation. Now it rotates them randomly along all directions, but we don't want that. So let's disconnect it and let's add an align Euler to vector node. And let's connect the rotation from curve to points to this rotation and connect the random value to this vector, and then connect this rotation to the rotation of instance on points node. Now set the rotation pivot to Z, and then we have something like this. Now it goes in all directions, but we don't want that. So we'll keep the minimum to 0 and we'll change the max from 110 to 00 for X and Y. So it does not rotate anything in the X and Y direction. So we get rotation only along the Z axis, but we'll change this Z value maximum to tau, which is TAU, or which comes out to be 6.283. It is basically 2 pi or 2 into 180 degrees or 360 degrees in radians. So we get something like this. Now if you still don't like it or the way this works, you can just adjust the random value scale. I'll just keep it to this one and keep the seed to 0 to keep things simple. Now we have the basic setup complete for the border. So let's move the group input and output to the side a little, and let's frame this all so we know what's going on. So select all of this and press Ctrl J to frame it, and you can press F2 to rename it to something like stone border. Now if you click on this, you can move this whole system from here. Also you can press N to go into the properties panel for this, and if we go into the node and properties, you can change the label size from here and turn on or off this shrink. I don't see a pretty visible change. If anyone knows, just let me know. I guess it just shrinks it along the zoom level, but I find it almost the same, or maybe not. So let's just turn off the shrink and let's add our pond. For the pond, what we will do is take this original geometry and pull out a noodle and add a fill curve node. Fill curve, and we don't see anything right now because we need to connect it to the group output. So let's hide this panel by pressing N, and let's connect this to this output. So take this mesh and connect this to the group output, and you'll notice that this one goes away, but we can see the filled curve. So if we need to connect both of these, let's undo and add a join geometry node. Join geometry at the end, and let's plug this mesh into this join geometry. Now you can see we have the pond as well as the pond border. Now differentiating multiple things is not easy after this, so let's add some simple materials to see what's going on. So I'll add a water material and color it blue. Let's add a stone material. We'll change them later on, but for now let's just give them basic colors. And let's name it grass only, and let's color it green. Now let's add a set material node for both of these, so we don't have any confusion later on. So if you plug it close enough, it will come inside this border. So let's select stone for this, and let's add similarly a set material for this as well. And let's add the water material in it. Now if we go into the material preview mode, you can see that we have colors going on and we can see things better right now. Next we are going to add the grassland or the surrounding area to this base. So let's move this group output to the side, and let's start by adding a grid. Press Shift A and grid to add a mesh primitive grid, and let's connect this mesh to the join geometry node. Now you can see we have a small grid around here. Let's change the size to something like 10 by 10, and if we go into the wireframe mode, you can see that we have 3 vertices according to this. So let me turn off the grid, and you can see 1, 2 and 3 vertices along this and this axis. So let's increase it to something like 10, and you will see we have more lines now. Let's change it to something like 20 by 20 because we need more geometry to instance grass on this. You can also change this according to your computing power. If you have more power, you can increase the size and the vertices on these, but let's keep it to 20 by 20 for now. And you also see that this face does not look very well, so change the fill curve from triangles to n-gons just like we did in the last tutorial to make it a better looking face. Now what we need to do is we need to extrude this grass area downwards wherever there is water, so we get some depth effect inside the negative z-axis. So how we'll do is we'll target this geometry, this filled curve, and select only that part to extrude downwards. Let's start first of all by adding a extrude mesh node. So let's press Shift A and add an extrude mesh and plug it right here, and you will see that it extrudes it upwards, and it also extrudes all individual faces. So we don't actually want that, so let's turn off this individual, and it now extrudes everything upwards. Now we need it to be downwards, so we will change the scale to negatives, something like 0.7 for now. But now we will notice that everything is going downwards, but we don't want that. We need it to just go down where there is water. So let's go into the material tab to see it better, and let's add a set material node and add a grass material here so we can have better idea. So we will use a raycast node to select or access this geometry right here. So in the extrude mesh we have a selection, so we can use it to show which faces we wanted to extrude. So let's say add a raycast node, and we need this to sample this curve geometry or the filled curve. So what we need to do is take this fill curve and plug it into this raycast geometry. So let's try to connect it like this, and it's a bit difficult, but if you had the node wrangler enabled, go to edit, preferences, add-ons and search for node wrangler. It comes by default within Blender, and turn it on. Now what you can do is press Alt and right click on this node and take it to this node, and it will automatically connect the geometry to geometry. Now this does not look very good, so again another node wrangler trick is to press and hold Shift and right click and drag, and it will connect a breakpoint right here. So if this is selected, you can press G to move it. So let's just move it around here, and remember it's Shift right click and swipe and it will create a new connection. So press G while it's selected and you can move it like this. So this is just so that it looks a bit better and we don't have much confusion going on later. Now what we'll do is, this raycast has now access to this geometry, that is the filled curve. Now what we need to do is select the is hit and connect it to the selection. But before that, let's check the ray direction. So the direction of the ray is 0, 0, -1. That means 0 in the x direction, 0 in the y direction and -1 in the z direction, that is towards the negative z direction. So wherever this geometry hits this grid on the negative z axis, that will be manipulated. So let's connect this is hit into the selection and you will notice that something just happened. So if you see it from the bottom face, you will notice that now only the pond area is being targeted and extruded downwards. So that is exactly what we want, but it does not look very good because we have this very weird shapes going on. This is due to the grid size. If you go into the wireframe mode, you will see that it takes only the edges to calculate the extrusion because of how geometry works. So let's take the grid and turn up the vertices to 40 by 40. Now it's a bit more fine mesh, so you will notice that we have some better looking edges. Next, what we can do is add a subdivide node, subdivide mesh, and connect it to here, and you will see that it will increase the smoothness level even more. You can just turn it on or off if you want. It does not make a lot of difference, but it does make a lot of difference on the performance. So if you keep on it increasing, it will look very smooth, but it will be very demanding on your PC. So let's turn it to 0 or just mute it altogether. Press M to mute it. Now another way we can fix this is by scaling this face towards the inside. So now we cannot see the face very much, so let's go into the colors panel and let's change the alpha on this. So let's go into the material tab and select water, and let's select the base color and reduce the alpha, and also change the blend mode from opaque to alpha blend, and change the shadow mode to none and turn off show backface. Let's also go into the transmission and turn it on to 1. Reduce this alpha right here. I guess we don't need this alpha, but we should reduce this alpha right here, and we will see the bottom of the lake. We will set the proper materials later in the video or maybe in the second part, but for now let's just keep it around this so we can see it better. So you will notice now that this extrude is completely working fine. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to scale this base a little bit inwards so we get some smoother edges around here. So let's move this set material to the side and let's add a scale elements node. Press Shift A and add a scale elements and plug it right here. So to make this work properly, because if we scale it right now, it scales everything, but we don't want actually that. So what we are going to do is take this extrude mesh and select this top and add it to the selection. Now what it does is it only scales this top face, which is this one. So if we scale it now, you'll notice that it's only scaling the lower face, which is extruded. So let's scale it a little bit inwards. Let's say around 0.8. That should be fine. Now let's add ground around this plane. So what we'll need to do is we have the base of the pond set up right here. So let's just frame this as well. Select all of these and press Ctrl G, press F2 to rename. So let's call this grass and let's increase the label size to something like 60. Press N to get this panel if you forget, and let's move the join geometry towards the side. Now what we need to do for grass is we need to select just this geometry which is up and not extruded, and we need to instance some grass on this. So what we'll do is we'll take this scale elements geometry and pull out a noodle from here, and let's add a separate geometry node. this separates the geometry into the selection and the inverted of this selection. So whatever we put into this selection will be outputted into this selection, and whatever is not in this selection is outputted in this inverted selection. So similar to what we did here, we will take this top of the extruded mesh and connect it to this selection. So now this geometry has only the top part. So if you have the node wrangler enabled, you should enable it. If you don't have it till now, you can press Ctrl, Shift and left click to get a viewer node, which will just show you what is happening around in this node that you select. So if we select onto any node, you can just see it live on the viewer node. So now if you notice, we added this extrude mesh node to this selection, and now it only shows the area or the faces which are extruded. So if we remove this selection, you will get all of this, and if we just add the top, you will get just this selection. But we want the inverted, so let's try to connect this inverted to this viewer, and you will see that we get only the inverted area, which is actually what we want for the grass. Now we can instance some grass on here. So you can either make some grass by modeling simple planes and bending it, but we are going to use a very simple method and instance some cones for the grass. So I'll just select this viewer node and delete it because we don't actually need this. So let's connect this separate geometry with the join geometry in the end right here. So let's zoom out and select this inverted and connect it to the join geometry. So it is also connected to that. Now we need some instance on points, but before that we need to distribute some points on the faces. So let's add a distribute points on faces nodes, and then let's add an instance on points node. Now what we need to do is instance something on these points. So let's say instance a cone, mesh primitive cone, and let's connect this mesh to the instance. Now you will see that it does not look good at all and it looks very weird, but at least we have it only on the selected faces where we want and not on these faces. We'll actually see it if we just reduce the scale to let's say 0.2. You'll notice that we don't actually have it on the pond but only on the sides. So to set the cone to look like grass, what we'll do is, this is actually from a tutorial from Cartesian Caramel. I guess I will link it below in the description if I find it. And let's select the vertices to 6, side and fill segments to 1. Radius top will be 0, but radius bottom will be 0.02. Now you can change it according to your scene size, but this is what works for my scene. So now you see it looks like a grass strand, single grass strand. Now we just need to change the density. So we can change the density from here. So let's increase it to something like 100 or let's say 150, and you will see that we have some grass going around. Now we also need to change the height. So let's increase the height to something like 3 and it looks good. Now we need some variation in scale also, but let's add a material for this first. We actually need another grass material, so let's add and name it tall grass. Let's make it a darker green. Let's add a set material node right after the instance on points, and let's set it to tall grass, and now you can see this better. Now let's add a random value node and we'll keep it to float and plug the value into the scale. So now it randomizes the grass also. Let's reduce the depth to 2 so we get some better variation, or let's just decrease it a little bit more, let's say 1, and we have a better variation of the grass. Now that is all for this tutorial, part 1, and we'll continue it in part 2, and we'll add the textures and the materials, and we'll add the objects that go into the pond as well. So this is our progress so far. We have curves and we have a procedural pond that moves along with our curves. So if you go into edit mode and move the pond, you will notice that our pond successfully moves, and it moves the grass with it as well, and the water is moving along it as well. So let's add some wind effects to the grass in the next one and some better materials in the next one. This is the final node texture if you want to see it. First we have the stone border, then we have the grass, and then this is the base grass, and this one right here is the tall grass. This one is the fill curve for the actual water. So try this one, and if you're a beginner this will be a bit overwhelming, but that is why it's divided into multiple tutorials, so you don't get overwhelmed and you get time to take things slowly at your own pace. So that's all for this video, and I hope to see you in the next one with some progress.